The chandeliers of Ashbourne Manor glimmered like suspended constellations, their light fractured through crystal and rumor alike. Beneath their brilliance stood Lady Eleanor Whitcomb, wrapped in the soft blue of a gown chosen more for dignity than for allure. The music, an elegant waltz threaded with vanity, drifted over the marble floor where youth and wealth spun in practiced delight. At the edge of that glittering world, she waited, one gloved hand resting upon a silver fan, the other hidden within folds of fabric that had known too many seasons of hope. It was her 10th winter ball since the whispers began. 10 years of smiles that never reached eyes, of invitations that felt like obligations, of laughter that cut like lace, fine, deliberate, and cold. She had learned to bear it with quiet grace, though the weight of it pressed upon her as heavily as the jewels at her throat. Across the ballroom, 2 young debutantes giggled behind their fans. "Poor Aunt Eleanor," murmured one, her words veiled but not softened by amusement. "She shall petrify in silk before she ever finds a husband." The other tittered, adding, "The old maid aunt. A title well earned, don't you think?" The phrase fluttered through the air like a poisoned ribbon, caught and passed by lips too idle to care whom they wounded. Eleanor heard it, of course. She always did. But tonight, something within her, the last quiet corner of faith that love might still find her, tightened and began to fade. She turned her gaze toward the window, where frost had painted pale gardens beyond the glass, and pretended to study the snow. Reflection, however, is an unkind companion. Her own face stared back, softened by candlelight but marked by years of unspoken endurance. She had once been the belle of 3 seasons. Her suitors, courteous and numerous, had bowed, written verses, and drifted away. A broken engagement, his doing, not hers, had sealed her fate. Since then, she had been made an ornament of charity within her family's estate, beloved by nieces for her patience, pitied by her sister for her solitude, and quietly mocked by the world that measures a woman's worth by the ring on her hand. The orchestra struck another tune, brighter, livelier. Young couples swept past her, skirts whispering, laughter spilling. Eleanor drew a slow breath, careful not to disturb her composure. Her smile was faint but deliberate, an armor forged in years of small humiliations. When Lord Pelham, a portly man with wine-dark cheeks, approached with a hesitant courtesy reserved for the pitiable, she inclined her head and declined the dance. Better the sting of solitude than the mercy of condescension. Near the refreshment table, her sister, Lady Margaret Hensley, watched with fretful affection. "You should not refuse every offer," she whispered later, taking Eleanor's arm. "Society notices such things." "Society notices everything," Eleanor replied, her voice even, eyes distant. "It is their sport." Margaret sighed, looking toward the crowd. "It is cruel sport, but it is the world we inhabit." Eleanor said nothing. She had long ago learned that defending one's dignity in such a world was like defending flame against a storm. It flickered, it bent, but sometimes by sheer will, it endured. The evening crept forward, gilded and merciless. The ballroom scent of roses and candle wax began to thicken. The laughter, once musical, turned shrill. A young man stumbled, too much champagne in his blood, and made a jest loud enough to silence a dozen conversations. "Perhaps Lady Whitcomb waits for a ghost. 10 years, and none mortal have obliged." The laughter that followed was quick, apologetic, but it carried. Eleanor's hand tightened on her fan until the ribs creaked. Then, deliberately, she released it, let her shoulders lower, and gave no sign that she had heard. Around her, conversation resumed with the fragile brightness of guilt trying to forget itself. She excused herself to the anteroom, where a small fire burned low. The walls there were lined with portraits, faces of women whose painted serenity mocked her unrest. She stood before one of them, a duchess of centuries past, and whispered, "Were you happy?" The silence answered in kind. Outside, the snow deepened. Carriages came and went. Time folded upon itself, and for a moment Eleanor felt as though she were the last figure in a fading tapestry. Seen, pitied, but never touched. Then the music stopped. A murmur moved through the ballroom like wind through leaves. Footsteps, firm, measured, crossed the threshold. Eleanor turned, drawn by instinct rather than curiosity. The newcomer stood framed by the great doors, tall, austere, his presence unsettling the air itself. His coat bore the muted richness of old nobility. The insignia upon his shoulder glimmered faintly in the candlelight. A voice near the orchestra gasped, "The Duke of Ashbourne, returned from Vienna." The words rippled outward, transforming the room. Conversations stilled, fans lowered. Even the violins hesitated before reclaiming their melody. The Duke inclined his head politely to the hosts, yet his gaze swept past them, as though searching for something unsaid, unseen. Eleanor watched in silence, the faintest curiosity piercing her weariness. She had heard the name, Julian Hawthorne, Duke of Ashbourne. A widower at 35, rumored to possess both vast fortune and a temperament colder than English marble. His arrival tonight was unexpected, his timing, fateful, perhaps. Their eyes met across the ballroom, not dramatically, but as if chance itself had momentarily forgotten its indifference. His expression did not change, yet something flickered in his gaze, a recognition not of beauty, but of kindred solitude. Eleanor looked away first. She told herself it was nothing, an accident of glances, a courtesy mistaken for notice. Yet, as she turned, she felt the peculiar weight of being truly seen, and it unsettled her more than ridicule ever had. The music resumed, a waltz rich with memory. The Duke spoke briefly with the hosts, accepted no introductions, and yet his gaze found her again. Slowly, deliberately, he crossed the floor. The crowd, sensing novelty, parted in silence. Every eye followed him, every whisper stalled mid-breath. Eleanor's pulse betrayed her composure, quickening beneath calm features. He stopped before her. For a moment, no sound existed but the crackle of fire and the faint sigh of the violins. "My lady," he said at last, his voice low, resonant, precise. "Forgive the intrusion. You seem to have lost something." She frowned slightly, uncertain. Then she saw, the glove in his hand, white kid leather, hers. She must have dropped it when she left the ballroom earlier. He extended it toward her, bowing just enough to stir the air between them. Their fingers brushed, gloved, proper, yet charged with something unspoken. "Thank you, Your Grace," she murmured. He inclined his head. "Not at all. Some things should not be left upon the floor, lest they be trampled by the careless." And before she could reply, he turned and walked away, leaving her motionless beneath the chandeliers, the glove warm in her palm, and a strange, fragile tremor in her heart. Around her, whispers began anew, but for the first time, Eleanor did not hear them as weapons. They sounded, instead, like the faint rustle of pages turning at last. The morning after the winter ball arrived beneath a sky of faint gold and frost. Ashbourne Manor slept late, its laughter and perfume fading into the chill silence of dawn. Yet in the small estate 2 miles beyond, the Whitcomb residence, Lady Eleanor sat awake, still in her dressing gown, a single glove resting upon her writing desk. It was the same glove the Duke of Ashbourne had returned to her, the same one whose touch had, absurdly, unsettled the quiet rhythm of her solitude. She had told herself it was nothing, a gentleman's courtesy, magnified by gossip and her own restless mind. But as she studied the glove now, she saw it differently. It lay like a token of interruption, a symbol of something she had long forgotten, the possibility of being noticed without pity. Outside, the day grew sharper. The servants whispered as they passed her window, already murmuring of what the town would soon devour. By midday, it began, a rumor, small and glittering, like a shard of glass. The Duke had danced with Lady Whitcomb. Then, the Duke had spoken tenderly to her. By afternoon, it had evolved into scandal. The old maid aunt had ensnared the Duke of Ashbourne. When Eleanor's sister arrived in haste that evening, cheeks flushed with alarm, she carried the latest embellishment. "Eleanor, tell me it is untrue," Margaret urged, closing the parlor doors. "They say you spent half the night alone with him near the terrace. Heavens, what will people think?" "That people are incapable of silence," Eleanor replied, voice cool but weary. "We exchanged perhaps a dozen words. He returned a lost glove, nothing more." Margaret wrung her hands. "You know how they are. They will call it flirtation. They will say you engineered it." Eleanor turned to the window, where dusk had begun to fall like violet smoke across the fields. Let them. The world has long since decided my character. I have no further use in correcting its imagination. Her sister's expression softened. Eleanor, I only wish to protect you. You know how fragile a woman's reputation can be. A duke's glance, misinterpreted, could ruin you. Eleanor smiled faintly. My dear, society cannot ruin what it already discarded. They dined in silence, though the weight of unspoken fears hung between them. Outside, the frost deepened, and as night settled, a carriage rolled through the gates, black, sleek, bearing the crest of a hawk in flight. The butler entered moments later, bowing low. A letter for Lady Whitcomb, he announced. Delivered by the Duke's messenger. Margaret's eyes widened, but Eleanor only inclined her head. Leave it on the mantel, she said quietly. When the door closed, she regarded the sealed envelope with the same stillness she wore before battle. The wax bore the mark of Ashbourne. She hesitated, then broke it. Inside, on heavy parchment, the handwriting was firm and unadorned. My lady, forgive the liberty of a letter. Society's tongues are unkind, and yet I find myself unwilling to let a falsehood stand unchallenged. You returned my glove with such quiet grace that I fear I have not expressed my gratitude adequately. I wish you to know that the fault lies not in your conduct, but in the idle cruelty of those who cannot comprehend dignity when they see it. If the scandal has brought you distress, I offer my sincerest apologies. Should you wish to speak further, I shall be walking tomorrow morning by the lake near your grounds. Julian Hawthorne, Duke of Ashbourne. Eleanor read it twice, her pulse steady but quick beneath the surface. The words were measured, but there was something beneath them, a restraint straining against itself. Margaret, reading her silence as peril, whispered, You cannot meet him. To do so would only feed the gossip. Eleanor folded the letter carefully. Perhaps. But there comes a point when a woman grows tired of being caged by whispers. If I am to be condemned, let it be for truth, not for fear. The next morning was pale and misted. The lake shimmered like glass veiled in breath. Eleanor walked there alone, her cloak drawn close, the letter hidden within its folds. When she saw him waiting by the water's edge, she was struck not by grandeur but by stillness, the kind that comes from long solitude. He bowed, the gesture precise yet unguarded. Lady Whitcomb, Your Grace. Her tone held neither warmth nor reproach, only composure. You are early. I slept little, he said simply. I dislike leaving matters misunderstood. She regarded him, her breath faint in the cold air. And yet, Your Grace, misunderstanding is society's most cherished pastime. He smiled, a brief, reluctant curve of the lips. You speak as though wounded by it. I am merely acquainted with its endurance. A silence settled between them, rich with unspoken things. The lake mirrored their figures, fragile and uncertain. I had thought, the Duke began slowly, that age brings mercy, that gossip would turn its appetite elsewhere. Yet it appears cruelty matures as finely as wine. Eleanor looked away, her voice soft. Cruelty merely changes its subject, Your Grace. It began with the young, now it feeds upon the forgotten. He studied her face then, the quiet intelligence in her eyes, the faint tremor in her poise that betrayed long habit, not weakness. You endure it with remarkable grace. Grace, she said, is merely silence performed elegantly. Something in her honesty startled him. He took a step closer, his breath visible in the cold. Then allow me to break it, if only for a moment. Her heart startled, though her expression remained still. To what end? He hesitated, as if weighing centuries of decorum. To remind you that not all who see you are blind. For the first time, Eleanor faltered. Your Grace, you risk much in saying so. I risk only being sincere. His gaze held hers. The world may mock what it does not understand, but He stopped himself, then continued quietly. I admire what endures. The wind stirred between them. Somewhere in the distance, church bells marked the hour, each toll a reminder of propriety's watchful eyes. Eleanor stepped back, reclaiming her composure. Admiration is a dangerous courtesy, your grace. It too can be misinterpreted. Then let them misinterpret. His voice dropped, almost a vow. I have grown indifferent to the audience. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with careful deliberation, she removed the glove he had once returned to her and held it out. Then take this back, my lord. It seems every object between us becomes rumor. He looked at the glove, then at her. A gift return feels too final. It is protection, she replied. For both of us. Their eyes met, a fragile duel of will and longing, and then she turned, her cloak stirring the frost. He did not follow. That night, the gossip reached London. By candlelight, ladies whispered that the old maid aunt had tempted the Duke by the lake, that she had been seen holding his glove, pressing it to her heart. None of it was true, and yet, perhaps in some deeper way, it was. Eleanor sat by her window, the glove no longer on her desk but hidden in a drawer. Outside, snow fell softly over the world that would never understand her. And somewhere beyond the white horizon, the Duke of Ashbourne rode back toward his estate, the memory of her voice echoing through the frost. Neither of them knew it then, but the scandal had already done its work. It had drawn two solitary hearts into the same cruel orbit, destined to collide or shatter. Winter had sharpened the world into glass. The gardens of Whitcomb House lay half-buried beneath frost, every hedge glittering like a line of frozen lace. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and iron, the perfume of stillness after scandal. Within that silence walked Lady Eleanor Whitcomb, her cloak drawn tightly, her boots pressing faint crescents into the snow. She came here every morning now, not for beauty but for refuge. The house had grown suffocating with whispers, and the town, merciless as always, had begun to speak her name with pity sweetened by malice. It had been a fortnight since the meeting by the lake. The Duke's words lingered like embers she could neither feed nor extinguish. He had not written again, though his silence seemed to fill the air around her more than words ever could. She told herself that it was better this way, that distance was a kindness disguised as restraint. Yet sometimes, when the light fell a certain way upon the frost, she felt the ache of unfinished conversation pressing behind her ribs. That morning, the world was still when a shadow moved beyond the garden wall. At first she thought it a trick of light, but then came the sound, footsteps, deliberate, measured, unmistakable. She turned, heart thudding once before reason caught it. The figure that emerged through the arch of holly and snow was unmistakable. Tall, severe, coat dark as ink against the white earth. The Duke of Ashbourne. He bowed slightly. "Forgive the intrusion, Lady Whitcomb. I found the gate unlatched." Her voice, when it came, was steady though her breath faltered in the cold. "Your Grace, you risk much by coming here." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held no joy, only quiet defiance. "I have been accused of worse follies." She hesitated, then gestured toward the frozen garden path. "Walk with me, then. If society must condemn us, let it at least be for the truth." They moved slowly between the hedges, the air brittle around them. The Duke's breath curled like smoke in the chill. For a while neither spoke. The silence between them felt almost sacred. The crunch of snow beneath their steps was the only sound, each footfall marking the fragile distance between restraint and confession. At last he said, "I have heard what they say of you." His tone was soft but edged with anger. "That you ensnared me. That you beg affection to remedy age. It sickens me." Eleanor's lips curved faintly. "Cruelty thrives on imagination, Your Grace. I am long accustomed to its appetite. But you should not have to be." His voice roughened, his composure fraying. "It is injustice of the worst sort, that dignity should be mistaken for manipulation." She stopped walking and turned to face him. Her cheeks were flushed from cold, her eyes clear and steady. "And yet, injustice is the oldest companion of women like me. It requires no defense, only endurance." He studied her as though seeing her anew. "Endurance is not peace." "No," she admitted. "It is survival. There is a difference." A wind passed through the garden, shaking frost from the boughs above. A few flakes drifted down like ash between them. The Duke's gaze softened, his expression caught between admiration and pain. "I have thought often of that night," he said, "of how you looked beneath those chandeliers, so composed, while every eye tried to break you. I wondered how you bore it." "I bore it," she replied quietly, "because breaking would have pleased them too much." He exhaled, the sound misting in the cold. "I envy your strength." "Do not," she said. "It was not freely chosen." Silence again. Somewhere, far beyond the garden, a church bell tolled the hour. The sound carried through the stillness like a heartbeat. "You should not have come," she said softly. "Every visit, every word, becomes another rumor to devour." "I know," he answered. "And yet I find myself here. Every day since that letter, I have tried to forget the sound of your voice. I have failed." Eleanor turned away, her gaze tracing the bare rose bushes, their thorns crusted in ice. "You mistake sympathy for something greater. I am a subject of gossip, not poetry." He stepped closer, his shadow falling across hers. "No, I mistake nothing." "Your Grace," she began, but he interrupted gently. "Eleanor." The sound of her name from his lips startled her more than any confession could. It was as if the world itself paused to listen. He continued, quieter now. "When I was in Vienna, I learned to read silence. Courts are filled with men who speak too much, women who must say nothing. You remind me of them, the ones who suffer in stillness while others perform. But your silence, it demands attention. It is not submission. It is command." Her throat tightened. "You see nobility where the world sees ruin." "I see truth," he said simply. She turned back to him, her breath trembling in the cold. "And what would you do with that truth, if you held it?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Guard it. Honor it. Perhaps even—" He stopped, his restraint visibly warring with feeling. "Forgive me. I overstep." "No," she said softly. "You speak only what I dare not." The admission hung between them, fragile and perilous. The Duke reached out as though to touch her, then hesitated. His hand hovered in the air, gloved, uncertain. Her eyes fell to that hand, the same one that had once held her glove like a vow unspoken. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her own and let her fingers rest upon his for the briefest second. Even through leather, the contact carried a warmth that shattered composure. A voice called suddenly from the terrace. "Eleanor! Eleanor, where are you?" It was her brother, Lord Whitcomb, stern, protective, already suspicious. The Duke stepped back at once, every trace of intimacy replaced by decorum. Eleanor turned toward the house, her heart racing, breath sharp with alarm. Her brother's figure appeared at the garden edge, his expression darkening as he saw them together. "Your Grace," he said coldly, "this is an unexpected honor." The Duke inclined his head, posture flawless. "My lord, I was merely enjoying the morning air. Lady Whitcomb was kind enough to tolerate my intrusion." Lord Whitcomb's gaze hardened. "Society already feasts upon her name, sir. I suggest you deny it further nourishment." Eleanor's cheeks burned with humiliation, though her voice remained calm. "Edward, please." "No, Eleanor," he interrupted. "You know what this means." The Duke's eyes met hers once more. In them she saw regret, fury, and something deeper, promise, perhaps, or defiance. He bowed low, the movement slow, deliberate. "Then I shall take my leave, my lord," he said quietly. "But I will not apologize for wishing Lady Whitcomb well." He turned toward the gate, his figure dissolving into the pale distance. Eleanor stood motionless, her brother's rebuke fading into noise. Her pulse still echoed in her fingertips, the ghost of warmth where their hands had touched. As the Duke disappeared beyond the frost-lined hedges, she whispered under her breath, unheard by anyone but the garden itself, "Then I shall wait, my lord, 10 years if I must." Snow had returned to Ashbourne like a memory unwilling to fade. 12 months had passed since the garden, and the scandal that followed had scattered like ash in the wind, leaving behind the faint scent of something unfinished. Lady Eleanor Whitcomb had grown quieter still, her beauty unchanged, her dignity untouched, but her heart more cautious than before. Society had turned its gaze elsewhere. New scandals had bloomed, new tragedies performed. Yet the echo of that winter remained, haunting her like the final note of a song that refused to die. It was late December when the invitation arrived, an envelope of cream paper and gold seal, the handwriting unmistakably precise. The Ashbourne Winter Ball. The same event that had once humiliated her, and, by cruel symmetry, the same that had altered the course of her solitude. Her sister urged her to decline. Her brother forbade her to attend. But Eleanor, after a long silence, placed the invitation beside her candle and whispered, "It began there. Let it end there." The night of the ball came draped in silver mist. Carriages lined the drive of Ashbourne Manor, their lamps flickering like fireflies against the frost. The grand hall glittered with crystal and laughter. Violins trembled with elegance. No one noticed when Lady Whitcomb entered, alone as she always had, but the hush that followed her steps soon turned heads. She wore a gown of midnight blue, simple but commanding, as though the night itself had gathered around her shoulders. Her eyes, calm and distant, surveyed the room that had once devoured her pride. The orchestra's music swelled, and the years folded away. Yet something had changed. The laughter no longer pierced, the whispers no longer drew blood. She was older now, yes, but stronger too, carved by silence into something rarer than beauty. She greeted the hosts with composed warmth, then moved toward the gallery, her steps light, her presence a quiet rebuke to memory. Beneath the chandeliers, couples spun in a tide of satin and grace. Eleanor paused, her gaze resting briefly on the place where she had once stood invisible. She almost smiled. The world had forgotten, but she remembered everything: the cruel laughter, the glove, the look that had altered her heartbeat forever. Her reverie broke when the orchestra's tune shifted. The air changed. Heads turned toward the great doors as they opened, and a ripple of astonishment passed through the crowd. He had returned. The Duke of Ashbourne entered with the composure of a man who owed nothing to rumor. Time had refined him further. The faint silver at his temples only deepened his gravity. The company murmured with curiosity, admiration, speculation, but he seemed deaf to it all. His eyes swept the room once, then stilled. They found her instantly. Eleanor felt the world narrow to that gaze. The same quiet recognition, the same unspoken understanding that had once undone her beneath chandeliers. For a moment, she wanted to turn away, to preserve the fragile order she had built around her heart. But pride, that faithful warden, betrayed her with stillness. She did not move. The Duke crossed the floor, his progress marked by the silence of 100 curious hearts. When he reached her, he bowed, not perfunctorily, but with reverence, as though greeting a sovereign rather than a scandal. "Lady Whitcomb," he said softly. "Your Grace," she returned, her voice calm though her pulse was not. "Ashbourne is as splendid as ever. Not as splendid as its company." A murmur ran through the nearest guests, words too bold for a ballroom. Yet the Duke seemed oblivious to consequence. She regarded him evenly. "You court danger again. I find I have grown fond of it." His tone was quiet, his expression unreadable. "Would you honor me with a dance?" The question was sacrilege. A duke, before half of London society, inviting the woman they had deemed unworthy. Eleanor's breath caught, her composure momentarily fractured. Every instinct urged retreat, but another voice, quieter and stronger, whispered that perhaps she had hidden long enough. She inclined her head. "If your Grace insists upon scandal, I shall not deny you the courtesy." He smiled, barely, but the warmth of it reached his eyes. The orchestra, sensing command, began anew. The waltz rose like moonlight, and the crowd parted. As he led her to the center of the floor, a hush spread, dense and electric. The first notes unfurled, and they began to move, slowly at first, then with a rhythm older than memory. Her gloved hand rested in his, her other upon his shoulder, each step measured, dignified, defiant. For Eleanor, the moment felt suspended outside of time. The chandeliers blurred into stars, the world shrank to the whisper of fabric and the steady strength of his hold. She realized, with startling clarity, that shame and grace could coexist, that she could be both wounded and unbroken. The Duke leaned closer, voice barely audible. "Do they still mock you, my lady?" She met his gaze, her lips trembling with something between laughter and disbelief. "If they do, I no longer hear them." "Then you are freer than I. And you, your grace? Have you not always been free?" He hesitated, eyes searching hers. "No. I have been watched, obeyed, and admired, but never free." The dance continued, their movements a conversation of glances and breath. Around them, society watched in spellbound silence. It was not the waltz that mesmerized, but the quiet revolution unfolding before their eyes, the forgotten woman and the untouchable man rewriting the language of dignity. When the music ended, applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling, as though all had witnessed something sacred. The Duke, however, did not release her hand. "Lady Whitcomb," he said, his voice carrying clear across the hall, "they mocked you for waiting. But I have waited too, for the one woman whose silence commands the room." Gasps rippled through the assembly. Eleanor's breath faltered. The heat of 1,000 eyes pressed upon her. Yet she did not withdraw her hand. He continued, softer now, only for her. "A year ago, I was a coward. I feared gossip more than truth. I left when I should have stayed. I will not make that error twice." Her composure broke at last. "Your Grace, please, this cannot." "It can," he said, interrupting gently. "If you will let it." The orchestra stilled. The world seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, the Duke dropped to one knee, drawing from within his coat not a ring but a single white glove, the one she had returned, carefully kept all this time. The crowd murmured in disbelief. He held it out, his voice low but firm. "You kept my honor that night, Lady Whitcomb. Allow me now to keep your heart." Eleanor stared at the glove, trembling. Every humiliation, every lonely season, every whispered cruelty seemed to dissolve beneath the weight of that gesture. Yet behind the awe lay fear. Fear of hope, fear of loss, fear of herself. "Rise, Your Grace," she whispered, though her voice broke with tenderness. "People are watching." "Let them," he said simply. The room swam with candlelight, faces blurred, the sound of her heartbeat louder than applause. She did not take the glove, but neither did she step away. The silence that followed felt infinite, trembling on the edge of surrender. And then, as if the moment itself had grown too fragile to bear, the orchestra began again, an unscripted swell that masked her breathless stillness. Eleanor looked down at him, the man who had once broken her composure and now offered her freedom in its place. For a moment that seemed suspended between heartbeat and eternity, no one moved. The Duke remained upon one knee, the white glove poised like an oath between them, while the world held its breath around their silence. The music faltered and fell into stillness. The chandeliers trembled with the faintest echo of their light. And then, the murmur began. A susurration of disbelief, scandal, admiration. Words darted through the hall like arrows. "He proposes, here, to her. After all that happened, the old maid aunt." But Eleanor heard none of it. All sound fell away, replaced by the soft thunder of her own pulse. She saw not the crowd, nor the judgment, nor the glittering ruin of reputation poised to fall anew. She saw only him, the Duke of Ashbourne, the man who had undone her composure a year ago and now knelt before her with a tenderness so unguarded it could only be called surrender. Her lips parted, but breath refused her. For a heartbeat she stood at war with herself, the proud guardian of her dignity against the tremulous wish she had buried long ago. In that instant, she understood what he had meant by freedom. Freedom was not absence of judgment. It was the courage to love despite it. The orchestra's leader, unsure whether to play, lifted his bow hesitantly, and a single violin note slipped through the air, soft as confession. The sound fractured the spell. Eleanor drew a breath that shivered through her, and the candlelight seemed to move closer, like stars bending toward her decision. She stepped forward. The movement was small, but it sent a ripple through the crowd. The Duke's eyes lifted, uncertain, almost disbelieving. She met his gaze, steady, luminous, and alive with something that had outlasted humiliation. "Your Grace," she whispered, her voice trembling between defiance and wonder, "you have chosen a most unorthodox moment for gallantry." A faint smile touched his lips. "Then I have chosen rightly." A sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob, and the tension broke like ice beneath thawing water. She took the glove from his hand, her fingers brushing his in a whisper of contact that burned more than any flame. The room erupted, not with applause, but with astonished silence. She held the glove before her, the symbol of both their shame and their courage, then placed it gently against her heart. "I cannot promise you ease," she said softly, though the words carried, "nor the approval of this glittering world." "Nor do I seek it," he replied. "Then you are a braver soul than I imagined. Only because you have taught me how." Their exchange hung in the air, fragile yet unbreakable. The Duke rose, slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. The crowd watched in rapture as he extended his hand, not commandingly, but with the quiet reverence of a man asking for everything without presumption. She hesitated one final moment, the last flicker of the life she was leaving behind, then placed her gloved hand into his. The hall seemed to exhale. The orchestra found its courage again. Music blossomed, no stately waltz this time, but something slower, deeper, achingly human. They began to dance, though the world had already dissolved into irrelevance. Every turn, every glance, every breath between them spoke the language of a love both forbidden and inevitable. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick, silent, infinite. Through the tall windows, flakes drifted past the candlelight, ghostly and serene. The guests watched in reverence as the Duke and Lady Whitcomb turned beneath the chandeliers, two souls bound not by spectacle but by the rare grace of understanding. For 10 seconds, 10 impossible, perfect seconds, the universe seemed to hold them still. 10 seconds in which every humiliation, every whispered cruelty, every lonely winter melted away. 10 seconds in which her heart forgot to fear and his forgot to rule. And then the world began again. The music swelled, voices returned, and the great machinery of society resumed its turning, but something fundamental had shifted. What had begun as scandal now gleamed as legend. The old maid aunt had become a woman reborn, and the Duke, once untouchable, was revealed as a man capable of devotion. Even the most cynical among them felt, for a fleeting moment, the fragile ache of envy. Later, when the night grew thin and the candles began their slow death, Eleanor stood upon the terrace alone. The snow had deepened, blanketing the gardens in soft white silence. She breathed in the cold air, her cheeks flushed from dancing, her heart a storm of disbelief and peace. Footsteps approached behind her, measured, familiar. She did not turn. "You should be inside," came the Duke's voice, quiet but close. "They will begin to talk." She smiled faintly. "Let them. They will tire of it soon enough. They always do." He came to stand beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. The moonlight silvered his hair, softened his expression. For a moment, they said nothing. The only sound was the slow hush of falling snow. "When you returned," she murmured, "I thought it a dream meant to punish me for hoping." He looked at her then, fully. "And now? Now I think perhaps it was mercy." He reached for her hand, this time without ceremony. The gesture was simple, human, two souls seeking warmth in a world too cold for honesty. "You once told me," he said, "that you no longer heard their mockery. How did you learn to silence them?" She turned her face toward him, her eyes bright as frostlit glass. "By learning that their words were not the truth of me. And that silence can be louder than gossip." He smiled, a quiet, wistful smile that seemed to hold the weight of everything unsaid. "Then I am still your pupil, my lady." "Then learn quickly," she said gently, "for the world will not forgive our lessons easily." He stepped closer, their breath mingling in the cold air. The moon sank lower, the snow deepened, and still neither moved away. 10 seconds, he whispered. "That is all it took." "For what?" she asked. "For me to see you." Her lips trembled into a smile that broke and mended all at once. "Then may we have a lifetime of 10 seconds." He drew her hand to his lips, and time itself seemed to bow in silence. The garden stretched before them, frozen, endless, and yet alive with promise. From within the ballroom, the music drifted out once more, soft, lilting, eternal. The Duke and Lady Whitcomb stood beneath the winter sky as though framed within the last act of a painting. Two figures neither conquered nor spared by society, but remade by love's defiance. The snow fell heavier now, veiling them from the world. Somewhere beyond, the clock struck midnight, its chime echoing through frost and light, sealing their story with the sound of something ending and something begun. 10 seconds of forever. And in those 10 seconds, the old maid aunt was lost, and the woman who had waited too long was finally found.